The Wheel of Time, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm starting a new series where I'm gonna go through some of the series I have read and highlight the good, the bad, and ugly in order to help you make the decision whether you should read these series or not. The Wheel of Time is without a doubt one of the most influential series ever written, having had more than 90 million copies sold and has recently been adapted by Amazon. So without further ado, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to the Wheel of Time. The good. You can't really talk about the Wheel of Time without talking about the world building. This series has some of the most intricate and rich world building I have ever come across in fantasy, period. If you just want to dive into a world rich with history, lore, and so many cultures and kingdoms, then pick up the Wheel of Time. Secondly, the characters. Now, the characters in this book are a contentious area, so I'll talk more about this later in the bad section as well. But the character arcs we see in this series is some of the best I have ever read. When you eventually finish this massive series and you start to reflect on where we started with these characters and where we've ended up, it is going to make you emotional. You also end up spending so much time with these characters that you can't help but get attached to them, not because they are perfect, but because they are flawed, just like everyone is. Thirdly, the plot. I'll be brief about this point, but the plot is incredibly epic in scale. It took Robert Jordan more than 10,000 pages to write the whole story. If you're looking for a story that will expand, and then expand more, and then expand even more, then the Wheel of Time will be right up your alley. Fourthly, this kind of relates to the world building, but the magic system is incredible. The magic system is basically tied to your sex. And in this world, the females are the one able to channel and are therefore much more powerful than men, which has led to a world where women mostly rule the world. But there is so much to the magic system. It's kind of like an onion. There are so many layers.
Onions have layers.
Lastly, the good thing about the Wheel of Time is its reread value. I have heard from so many people that they actually enjoyed the series even more on a reread than on their first read, which should just tell you how rich the writing style is. So those are the good things about this series. But the Wheel of Time is not by any means perfect, so let's talk about the bad. Firstly, the pacing. Being such a long series, this series has some inconsistent pacing. Some books are really well paced, and some have absolutely horrendous pacing. I've often heard that people appreciate the slower moments much more on a reread, but the pacing is a big obstacle, especially for readers who primarily read modern fantasy. And that leads me to the next point, the repetitive writing style. If you read this series back to back, then the repetitive writing style might bother you. Jordan loves to repeat himself, and he will frequently remind the reader about how the magic system works, who this character is, what is going on in this location, and so on and so on. Generally, if people read one Wheel of Time book maybe every 3 months or so, then having Jordan repeat these things will be incredibly helpful. However, if you're like me, who literally read the whole series back to back in 6 months' time, then these things might annoy you. Now, fortunately, you can just skim read those sections, but that is just something worth noting. Okay, characters. I did mention that the characters is one of the best aspects of this series. While these characters are some of my all-time favorite characters, a lot of them can be incredibly annoying at times. I literally wanted to punch some of these characters sometimes because they act like naive kids, which they are. There are so many characters who are just plain rude, have horrible communication skills, which leads to some really frustrating moments. I definitely think that you can justify the characters' actions, but I don't know anyone who didn't get at least a bit frustrated by these characters at times. Okay, let's talk about the length of the series. One of the main reasons why I was drawn to this series was because of its length. The fact that this is a massive 15-book series where you can just get lost in this massive world was so attractive to me. However, I must acknowledge that this is also a major turnoff for some readers. 10,000 pages is not appealing to everyone. You probably could have cut out maybe 500 pages of the series and you would have been absolutely fine. So this point really depends on the reader. If you love a big series, great. If you don't, then you probably won't enjoy the Wheel of Time. Okay, next up, let's briefly talk about The Eye of the World, the first book in this series. I love this book, but it is worth mentioning that this book is very tropey and reminiscent of The Lord of the Rings. Robert Jordan himself stated that he wanted to do his take on the farm boy to hero journey and said that he never really understood why the farm boy wasn't more reluctant in other fantasy works. But it might bother some readers how tropey the first book is. But that kind kind of tropiness is only a real issue in book 1. In the second book, The Great Haunt, this series starts to become its own thing, so if you don't mind a tropey first book, then you will be absolutely fine. Lastly, this might not bother a lot of readers, but Jordan has a very interesting way of describing combat. Very often, Jordan will not say, for example, this character lifted the sword and trashed the sword to the left, or something like that. No. Jordan uses something called sword forms, where he often writes that the character used cutting the clouds or the lion springs sword form, without much explanation on what that means. For some readers, that will be annoying. You are reading a battle scene, and then suddenly you will read about a sword form called wind and rain or reaping the barley or something like that, and you will not know specifically what that means. So yes, the combat is different than your typical fantasy. That being said, this didn't really bother me at all. And before we come to the ugly, I just want to say a special thanks to my patrons who support what I do here. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's turn to the ugly of the Wheel of Time. Fortunately, I only have 2 points here, but you know what is going to be on here. Let's talk about the Slog. The Slog is book 8 to 10 in the series and is infamous of being crazy slow. You have like 2,500 pages where almost nothing happens. It just blows my mind how this was not edited down to a single book, because the sad news is, you can't skip the Slog. There are some really major events happening in book 8 to 10 that have major ramifications for the rest of the series, so you really need to read it. Hate me if you want, but this is my opinion about the Slog. The other ugly part of this series is the romance. Where do I even start? Robert Jordan had an incredible ability to do world building, write characters, but he had no idea how to write romance. I won't mention any specifics because of spoilers, but some of the larger romances take place behind the scenes. Yes, that is right. You'll read about some characters traveling or something, and then suddenly, they are a couple. There were no warning signs or anything. No. They are now in love, and nothing more will be said about it. In this series, love just happens without any explanations a lot of the times. Also, some of the romances almost make no sense to me. There is a specific romance at the end of the series where I'm just like, what? But that is it. The Wheel of Time is a masterpiece that any reader of fantasy should at least give a try. It is not perfect, because no series or piece of literature is, but this is some of the best out there. Yes, you have things that are annoying, but if a series has incredible characters, plot and world building, then what more do you need? So guys, what do you think about this new series? Which series do you want me to do next? Thank you so much for watching, see you in the next video.